Hey, everybody. Steve here, Local Level Podcast. I'm sitting here today with Alen Takhsh. He's an immigration attorney out of Evanston, Illinois. And it's a pleasure to have you on. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And we had a really interesting conversation about a week or so ago when we first spoke. This is such a lightning rod subject, like we were talking about. People, when they hear about immigration, they just think, legal, illegal, what's good, what's bad, and there's a lot of misconception. But one of the things that you brought up when we spoke before is that you have a really, really interesting perspective on the whole immigration topic, just because you have a background that you come from a part of the world where a lot of people got would you call yourself a refugee? How would you kick off that story? Tell us your origin story.
Sure. Well, it's a story.
Yeah.
It's one that I don't think of as being extraordinary, but nonetheless, when I do tell my story to people, they sometimes cannot believe some of the ups and downs that my family and I have had to endure in order to make our way to the United States. But briefly, I suppose, I was born in Iran, in Tehran, the capital city. And as a matter of fact, I was born on February 11, 1979. It's an important date because it was the day of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. So the day I was born, Ayatollah Khomeini took power. And ever since then, Iran has never been the same. The Shah of Iran, the king of Iran, prior to Ayatollah Khomeini, before the Islamic Revolution, was not a perfect country. Iran was not perfect. Nonetheless, it was a country that showed more deference and more kind treatment towards minorities, such as my family. We are a Christian minority family from Iran. I am Assyrian Armenian. And despite being Christian, my family and I had to abide by the Islamic rules and regulations as we progressed throughout our lives in Iran. It just so happened that shortly after the revolution, Iran and Iraq entered a 8-year war. And so I bore witness to bombardments, to seeking refuge in bunkers, having the glass in our home shattered, bearing witness to public executions, hangings, public floggings. And as a 10-year-old bearing witness to all this stuff, I affirmatively grew up much, much faster than I wanted to. But it was just, I was a product of the environment in which I was growing up.
Yeah.
And so by the grace of God, luckily, we ended up being able to flee Iran. And that's a whole nother story. I mean, we won't get into that. But we made our way to Germany, where my father actually had to have heart surgery. My father was a civil engineer by trade. And they just gave me, they stamped my mother's passport inadvertently, and my name happens to be in my mother's passport. And so when we went to the airport, the agent said, "Wait a second, how did you get the visa for the kid? Because he is not allowed to leave." The presumption being that I'm going to grow up and serve in the military in the war against Saddam Hussein. So anyway, we ended up being able to flee, and hence began my life as a 10-year-old refugee in Germany.
Yeah.
There, we bore witness, my family and I bore witness to the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the anti-foreign sentiment was so very much rampant at that time. I remember distinctly people in the streets being interviewed, and one particular person said, not only should they build a wall, but they should build it higher. And so there was just a lot of anti-foreign, anti-East, anti-West sentiments all across Germany. And just a lot of events made me grow up even faster.
Yeah.
Case in point, there was a home just down the street from us where 5 Turkish families resided, and by virtue of an attack by neo-Nazis, by Molotov cocktails, their home was burnt to the ground, and 5 Turkish girls perished. And so you have a kid that is fleeing Iran, seeks refuge in Germany, is exposed to racism, and somehow we made our way to the United States because our paperwork got processed faster. It's a long story.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of turmoil, and by the time I set foot in the United States, I was 13 years old, having borne witness to a lot of different things. And so I studied hard because education was the only thing that I could really control. It seemed like everything else was outside my control. Yeah. And I'll briefly conclude by saying that somehow I made it to the University of Chicago. I ended up studying economics because I didn't want to have anything to do with immigration, let alone becoming an immigration lawyer. I wanted to become an investment banker. So I graduated, but in hindsight, every step that I was taking to further myself from the painful journey of making it to the United States was, in hindsight anyway, one step closer to one day becoming an immigration attorney. So in a nutshell, that's where I am. So when I say I'm an immigration lawyer with a keen perspective on this topic, I can honestly say to my client that I understand you, I feel your pain, I've walked in your shoes, and there are better days ahead. And so here I am, and I'm so excited to be talking to you because I think, as you pointed out aptly, it's just a very topical issue, and there's a lot of misconceptions, and hopefully we can have a intelligent conversation and make some progress along the way.
Absolutely. So it's really important whenever you're in any profession to have that on-the-ground background experience. I mean, some people have passion in certain topics and subjects, especially in legal. But if they don't have that actual life experience, they're not as well suited as somebody like yourself. To look a family in the eye and actually come from a place of knowing their struggle and, the turmoil and the horrors and in a lot of cases that these people are escaping from, when you have that knowledge, that goes so much further with the client relationship, I would imagine, with just the ability to convey that in court. I can't even, I can't even put myself in that mindset because I just don't have that set of experiences. And I think that's why a lot of people look at the subject and they just kind of dismiss people's struggles as, oh, well, that happened over there, or, hey, we got to protect our own people, this and that. And everybody has good points, coming from their perspective. But, the ability to hear these stories, like the story that you just, said, I mean, and we could do a whole show on each of those little 5-year periods in between, from being born to 13 years old. But I wanted to go back a little bit to when you did get to the United States for the first time at 13 years old, because your entire life, I would imagine, you were growing up hearing stories about before the revolution and hearing stories about how freedom may have been. Is that the case? You heard stories, but you never actually experienced it?
To some extent, yeah. So I would say that no one in their right mind wakes up one day and says, you know what, let me leave everything that I have worked for, leave everything that I have known, and leave everyone that I've ever known behind.
Yeah.
And let's just try something new, and fingers crossed it works out.
Yeah.
No one in their right mind does that. So it has to be something extraordinary to compel you to do that, whether it's your thirst for freedom, your thirst for economic benefits, and the list goes on, and we don't have to list all of those, but everyone has a motivation. And for us, we had an extremely good life in Iran prior to the revolution. As I said, my father was a civil engineer.
Yeah.
He worked with Brits and U.S. counterparts. He had hundreds of people working under him. Many of the roads in some of the remote areas in Iran were designed and paved, if you will,
right.
by my father. And so you don't just leave that behind and say, all right, take it easy, let's just try something new, as I said earlier.
Of course.
And it was the circumstances of the war, the circumstances of how we became to be treated as second-class citizens, as Christians in Iran, that really, I was going to quote Martin Luther King, but basically, the point I'm trying to make is that there comes a point where the cup of endurance runs over.
Right.
And as he pointed out, men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. And so our cup ran over in the 80s. And we did not want to be treated as second-class citizens any longer. We did not want to abide by rules and regulations to which we had no connection. And so when we came to the United States, the U.S. represented to us, to my family, to my father, the possibility of everything grand in life, freedom, economic prosperity. And at the time, my brother was finishing his medical degree at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. My sister had just finished her residence in Japan. She made her way to the United States in Philadelphia. My brother intended to do his residency here in the States. And so when our paperwork was processed finally, we decided to be a family unit again.
Yeah.
And the U.S. was the fresh breath of air that we so very much sought. We were so incredibly thirsty.
Yeah.
But as we'll talk, things were not peachy when we got here either. So, I mean,
right.
The struggles continued.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the grass is always greener, and it sounds like the U.S. was a lot greener than where you originally were coming from in many ways. As far as today, if you look at today, do you see any parallels from then and now going on?
To be honest with you, the only parallels that I see is the struggle that I and my family and I endured, and some of the struggles that new immigrants are facing. Those are the parallels. But the bottom line is that the U.S. has always been and should always remain a welcoming country. That is one of the most beautiful aspects of this country. I am a proud American. Yeah. And I always say, and this is a exercise in thought, I always ask my American-born friends, I say, not to take anything away from you, but which is more beautiful / worthy of praise? Someone who, by virtue of mom and dad having a baby, is born here, or someone who risks everything, including their life, in order to set foot on American soil. Now, again, that is nothing to take away from my American-born friends, not at all. It's a beautiful thing. God bless them. But I would posit that it is at least just as beautiful when somebody risks everything that they have ever known, including their life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When they call themselves an American.
Yeah. And I mean, that and it goes for most things in life. When you have everything kind of given to you, just as a right of birth, it doesn't, it just, you don't appreciate it as much. And we've had it so good in this country for so many years as natural born Americans that, we complain about a lot of things, and we complain, and sure, there's things to complain about. But like you said, I mean, for somebody that has that perspective of not living in a free society, or as free as it can be here, and just like you said, risking everything. Yeah, I mean, that is, you are going to work twice as hard. You're gonna appreciate everything twice as much. And I think that truly is the American dream that we built this country on. So I do agree with you 100% on that. And I think that's one of the main reasons, and I brought it up in the beginning, that our perspectives play such a big role on the decisions that we make and the opinions that we hold, with everything. Immigration being one of those main ones, where we, are either on one side or the other, and we don't necessarily put ourselves in other people's shoes. And I don't think that there's enough of a desire to try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and that's one of the main reasons why I enjoy doing this show, and that I'm thankful for having you on the show, is so you can tell those stories. When people sit down and they really think about all the things that they have opportunity-wise at their disposal in this country, that you can go out and not, for the most part, have to worry about, getting blown up, or, having a mob come and, burn your house down. For the most part, it's a beautiful thing. And the reason that I asked if you saw parallels is because now with things going on, unrest, there's a lot of people that are frightened that could become a reality, that we could, kind of lose our freedoms to the mob. I feel like that's something that needs to be talked about. And I think that this is a good parallel when you talk about, actually living in a place where there is, complete lack of human rights, and just a society that's totally intolerant to anybody that is not on your, moral side. It's something that really needs to be taken a hard look at by people that don't have that experience. And I think that it's very important for you to be able to tell your story to as many people as you can. And
to your point, you're making an incredibly important point. And just to add to that, in order to make sure that other people can see the world as I have seen it, or for me to see it as they have seen it, what's important is that we agree on a set of facts. Let's call them stipulated facts, as in the sky is blue, and then go on to argue policy.
Yeah.
How do we move forward? But I think one of the things that is happening now, which in the 25, 30 years that I've lived in the United States, I've not seen, is that it doesn't appear that we can even agree on what appear to be basic facts.
Right.
Because the presumption is that the facts that I am presenting are false, or in a way skewed, in order to advance my own agenda. And so that is kind of scary.
Yeah. I agree.
And I have conservative friends. I have liberal friends. Personally, I'm fiscally conservative, socially liberal. No one really is completely blue or completely red.
Right.
We're all different shades of purple, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so for us to get to a point where we are talking about the best interest of the United States, I think it's important to agree on a set of facts and say, hey, I look at them this way, you look at them this way, let's agree on some aspects of those facts and compromise.
Yeah.
And that I mean, back in the day, I mean, this is off a bit of a tangent, but back in the day in the 80s, presidential candidates would debate each other. And the idea was who can up the other in terms of sounding more compassionate towards immigrants. I mean, you can YouTube some of these debates from the 80s and early 90s. One in particular was George Bush Sr. I forget who his counterpart was. It was one of the primaries, and they were literally one-upping each other in terms of how compassionate they would be. Mm-hmm. And so now I feel like we're a race to the bottom, and that's not who we are. This has never been America, or the America that my father risked his life to bring us to.
Yeah. It's it's that one side or the other. There can't be any compromise. Either I win or I lose. The argument is how people think a lot of times. And on top of it, a lot of people will put their moral righteousness into the opinion. And if you disagree with it, you're morally corrupt or in some way, or you're a bad person, so you should be dismissed. And anybody with these beliefs is wrong, and I need to fight against that, problem. And I think that is a very dangerous place. In any society where you view somebody that differs in opinion as the enemy, you get what you saw in Iran, and if we don't think about these things, obviously we have to have compassion with our, for our neighbors. We all come from different walks of life, whether you come from the other side of the world or you come from on the other side of the city. It's all differences of opinion based on your perspective, based on your experience. And
exactly.
And that is something that I always bring up to people, because sure, I disagree with a lot of things that people say, here and there on many different topics. But at the end of the day, most of the time, we all pretty much want the same thing. We want safety, we want prosperity, we want health and happiness and love and for our families to do well, and freedom for the most part in this country. We want the freedoms to do the things that we want to do to achieve our dreams and goals. And that's what this country was kind of based on in the beginning, that freedom. So,
absolutely. And I would go one step further and say that, well, to add to what you're saying again,
sure.
Having lived in the Middle East, having lived in Europe, in the 80s, actually late 70s, 80s, Iran, early 90s, Germany, having traveled the world since then, and obviously being an American, I can affirmatively tell you that no question, hands down, the United States is the greatest country on earth. And so I am not saying this to be cute. I'm not saying this for purposes of pandering to your audience or whatnot.
Sure.
It is a fact. Case in point, the fact that I can go on Facebook and criticize a sitting president because I disagree with his policies or what he did yesterday or said yesterday or whatever, that idea is not lost on me. I appreciate it. In most other countries, perhaps not Europe, but in most other countries, you can be detained, you can be beaten, you can be tortured for exercising your human right to express your opinion. But one of the most amazing things about the United States, and I've always said this and I'll say it until the day I die, is that it is a work in progress.
Yeah.
That is what makes America so incredibly beautiful. It's this infant child that just is beckoning for guidance, beckoning residents, citizens to make it a better version of itself.
Yeah.
And so that's where you and I come in. As long as we keep the United States and its well-being and its best interest in mind as we dialogue and as we discuss what we need to do about this, that, or the other, then better days lie ahead. But the moment when we choose this group or that person as the reason why we are not where we want to be in life and blame that group or person and then advocate policies against that group or person, that is when we begin to walk on very, very thin ice.
Yeah.
And that is when we lose the spirit of what it means to be an American, what America stands for.
I agree. I couldn't have said it better myself. It really is important to keep that perspective. The well-being of, we have to protect the freedom of differing opinions to be heard. We have to be able to protect that, at all costs. And, and that's going to be for the benefit of us. And, we lead the world in many ways, as far as aid goes and support and keeping the peace for, some people can disagree with that. But, if we crumble, a lot of people will crumble as well that are dependent. And we don't want that. So, we'll go a little bit more to where we are now today, or where you are, your profession, as far as getting into immigration. Now, you said you wanted to be a stockbroker before. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So
I wanted to be an investment banker. I went to the University of Chicago wanting to, actually, side note, I went there wanting to study philosophy and political science, but once I got there, I realized what an amazing program they had in econ. And so I took a couple of classes and fell in love with economics. And once I graduated, it wasn't even up for discussion. I mean, you graduate, you become an investment banker, you make a lot of money, and you die afterwards. I mean, that's how it works. But that's not how it worked out. I did end up interviewing with a bunch of big firms and going to New York and this and that. But ultimately, fate took me to a completely different destination, and so I ended up applying to law school and attended the John Marshall Law School. I'm grateful to them for that opportunity. They chiseled some of my inherent skills and made me a better version of myself, and I appreciate that. And so when I graduated from law school, I still kept fighting the stream. It's almost like, in hindsight, it feels like I was a salmon swimming upstream. I just refused to go along with the current that the stars or the universe had planned for me. And so I kept resisting. I wanted to, I was like, okay, if I'm not going to be an investment banker, I'm going to be a corporate attorney. If I can be a corporate attorney, I'm going to be a business law attorney. Literally everything but immigration.
Yeah.
And so due to a million and one reasons, I ended up opening my own law firm. I had a few corporate clients and whatnot, but still, I came alive when I was representing immigration, or rather immigrants in immigration cases. And so over time, I would say, I opened my firm in 2011. And so over time, I would say since about 6-7 years, I have found that whether I like it or not, immigration law is my calling. And oftentimes, some of the kids that I mentor ask me, "Are you happy?" And so, that's an important question.
Yeah.
And I tell them it's an important question, but it's not the right question. The right question in life, whatever your profession might be, is, am I doing what I am supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
Am I on the right path? Does it feel as though I am a salmon swimming with the current rather than against the current? Because I tell you, I shed tears. I have anxiety attacks. I have depressive episodes. I have episodes where I laugh with my clients. I hug them.
Yeah.
We pray. Not all, I mean, it's just meaning there's so many different facets to what it takes to be an immigration lawyer. And one would say, okay, well, if you're crying, you're not happy. And that might be true, but I am exactly where the universe wants me to be. Sometimes being a soldier is not easy. Sometimes being a soldier is hard. And I don't mean the military type, but soldier in whatever profession. Sure. But you need to do what you need to do because that is what you feel is your calling.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. You make a good point that happiness is not necessarily the most important thing. It's fulfillment, and realizing your best effectiveness in life. Doing things that to the best of your ability, and really kind of opening up those floodgates to let your potential flow through you. I think is very important, very powerful. I think that if I look back at my life, the times that I feel were most important were not the times when I was laughing. The things that really I can look to and point at those times in my life that I learned the most, or I made a course correction in the right direction. Those were the times where there was struggle, and it was a sad time, or it was something that was hurtful, or something that made you cry, and things like that, and not just for yourself but for the people around you, and those things are very powerful parts of life, and it goes back to what we were saying before. It's perspective and your life experience that gives you that, it makes the scales come off your eyes. You can see clearly that way. And
absolutely.
And I really, people don't talk about that enough. I don't feel like, people don't. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people realize that. A lot of people do realize that, I think, but they're uncomfortable bringing it up, because it isn't the sexy thing to say,
Right. And the more we do that, Steve, the more we do that, the more we realize how unbelievably connected we are to one another.
Yeah.
In other words, we may disagree on immigration, but there are 99 million other things that you and I can talk about and agree upon. Sure. And realize how very much we're on the same page. And I will also say that for some of your younger audience out there, that there's a saying. Actually, I'm quoting the cartoon Kung Fu Panda, which happens to be one of my favorite movies. It says the wise turtle in that movie says, "You often meet your destiny on the road you take to avoid it." And so, as I look back at my life, the very thing that I tried to avoid, like the plague, ended up being the central force or the central figure in my everyday life. And so that saying is not always true, but I think it's important to have reflective moments in life and say, what am I good at? What do I feel like I need to do? And what is my calling? And so if you answer those questions, or rather ask yourself those questions every single day, the answers over time become self-evident without you even having to look for them, because, not to get melodramatic, because the answer really, at the end of the day, lies within you. And just like an onion, you're peeling layer by layer by layer, and finally you come face to face with your calling, whether that's being a physician or an attorney or an engineer or an artist, whatever the case might be.
Yeah, it happens gradually, and that's I think the meaning of life, the most, and in its essence is that journey for the most part, and that awakening that you have when you realize those things, and sometimes they change. Sometimes you feel like it's the right time now and you're on the right path, but maybe things kind of some people have multiple lives within one, that live multiple, with careers and, relationships and all different things. And, that's okay too. It's just, it is important though that we really are very similar, and that just goes to show you that there is something, the universe is real. There is something, there's a guiding force in some way. I truly do believe that. When we're talking about your day-to-day work, dealing with, the courts and dealing with these difficult cases and situations and stories, one thing I wanted to say beforehand, when you say that you have that connection with your clients and you have that emotional thing, how do you deal with that? The mental health factor has to be very difficult sometimes when you do hear these stories and you have that connection and you feel like you're powerless, because ultimately it isn't your decision. You have to make your case. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that?
Steve, it is the hardest part of what I have to do every single day. I am part attorney, part psychologist, part psychiatrist, part social worker, part friend, part whatever. In other words, and by the way, it's not hard for me to feel what they feel, because as we discussed before, I've walked that very path. I have been in those shoes. And so sometimes, again, not to get all melodramatic, but sometimes it is by virtue of a simple gaze. Sometimes it is by virtue of just staying silent as your client is silent and you are in the moment together, in pain together. Sometimes it is a matter of speaking sternly and saying, look me in the eyes and believe me when I tell you, I got you. You're not alone. We're in this together. I will be with you every step of the way. So every personality requires a different approach within the human spectrum. And so for me, it's second nature. You either have it or you don't. It's not something that I can fake, certainly, and I don't think a lot of people can fake. You either have it or you don't. And by the way, I also need to tell you that when we're talking about immigration, not every single one of my cases is, or rather involves a refugee or an asylee or someone fleeing, destruction, right? Because we're talking about people who have, or rather people who are fleeing back home, but also extremely affluent individuals who are investing in a U.S. company, or an immigrant who has engaged or is engaged to, or rather is married to a U.S. citizen, or an F1 student, or rather F1 visa student, where they are now commencing their studies in the United States. And so the spectrum is very, very wide, and it is my job to always calibrate my approach based on what the circumstance, or rather the situation, is requiring of me. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, and that's a good segue into the law part and the actual practice that you have. It isn't just all the terrible things all the time. It's sometimes, like you say, it's a client, maybe it's a Canadian or somebody that, it's something where it's paperwork, or it's, So can you tell us about that part of your business? Can you tell us about kind of like, how has I know when we talked about this before, the virus itself has set the courts back a crazy amount of time. So can you tell us a little bit about how your business has been impacted, with that situation?
Sure. So there are, and I'm simplifying this, but there are essentially two avenues when we talk about immigration. One is when you are affirmatively asking the US government to approve an application, to grant you work authorization, to grant you a green card or a legal permanent resident card, or naturalization, right? And that's dealt with or rather, that's under the Department of Homeland Security. And the agency that you're dealing with is US Citizenship and Immigration Services. Now, when things don't work out, or you have, let's say, committed a crime, whether that crime be misdemeanor, felony, or whatever the case might be, or there are some other circumstances that have arisen, and now you find yourself in immigration court, that's when the U.S. government is trying to remove you from the United States. And so that's under the Department of Justice. So we have DOJ on the one side, and we have the DHS on the other side, Department of Homeland Security. And so prior to COVID-19, for the first time in U.S. history, the number of cases pending in immigration court across the United States hit 1 million. In other words, if you're an immigrant and you get a notice to appear, which is the first document that you get sending you to immigration court, and you appear before a judge for your status call, in my world called a master calendar hearing, the judge will give you a trial date known as an individual hearing. Guess how many months or years down the road? Just take a guess.
You mentioned it to me before, and it's a crazy number. If you're the audience, make a guess in your head right now, and now you go ahead and tell us.
Right. 3 to 4 years. So I go in front of an immigration judge today, and that's pre-COVID, by the way.
Yeah.
He will give me a trial date sometime in 2024, mid-2024, if not later. And so when COVID hit, all the immigration courts essentially shut down, but for some detained cases, meaning people who are in detention, in detention facilities. So that's DOJ. On the other side, you have USCIS. USCIS under the Department of Homeland Security its function depends on the fees that applicants pay. So in other words, the fees that you pay to get a green card go towards paying the employees that are in charge of adjudicating your case. So for the first time, to my knowledge, I don't recall it ever happening before, and one of my colleagues might want to correct me on this, but the USCIS is running out of money, and unless Congress acts by July, a lot of, or rather 40%, if I remember correctly, I saw 40% of the workforce at USCIS will be laid off. So
wow.
These are trying times. These were trying times. And so add to that COVID-19, a global pandemic where USCIS is not doing any interviews for fingerprints, for regular interviews, for naturalization, or rather oath ceremonies. And the cases keep building up. And instead of making things easier and providing a path forward, our elected officials are making it harder. Meaning they are essentially broadening the net within which more people get trapped, therefore being sent to immigration court, exasperating an already very, very, very fragile system.
Yeah, I would say that it's a broken system. I would say at this point, if fragile is probably, putting it lightly. Now, is this by design or is this by negligence? What would you say?
To be frank with you, at this point, I don't even think it's a Democrat versus Republican issue, because the Democrats had the House and the Senate under Obama, and they failed to act. Now, again, I'm socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and I tend to, full disclosure, I tend to bleed blue and lean left. That being said, I am not a fan, to say the very least, of the manner in which, the callous manner in which the people on the right have approached immigration. And I'm trying to use my words very carefully, because this is not about me wanting to offend anybody. This is us trying to have an intelligent conversation. But it is absolutely callous to be playing Russian roulette with people's lives.
Yeah.
44 million immigrants in the United States. 1 out of 6, every U.S. worker is an immigrant. $300 billion in federal taxes paid by immigrants. $150 billion paid by immigrants towards state and local taxes. $20 billion in taxes, federal, paid by undocumented immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
$11.8 billion paid by them in state and local taxes. The people that make our food at the restaurants, people that invest in our companies, people that pick our cherries, pick your favorite fruit.
Yeah.
And so I get riled up, because it's as if we don't see that the very thing we are arguing against is the DNA that makes up who we are.
Yeah.
As if I were to tell you, hey, Steve, I hate my red blood cells. Man, I cannot stand my white blood cells. I mean, how idiotic does that sound?
Right.
How counterintuitive does that sound?
Yeah.
And so my earnest hope, I pray to God every single day that we stop using human beings, real people, our neighbors, our coworkers, our bosses, as chips, bargaining chips, because the decisions we make today affect their lives forever.
Yeah.
And I know this was a kind of a verbose answer to your point, but
no, it's great.
Take DACA recipients, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. DACA recipients, referring to the program, the 2013 program initiated by Obama, that basically said if you were brought to the United States through no fault of your own as a child, and there are some other requirements that you have to meet, then you get work authorization, and at least your removal, or rather the possibility of your removal, will be deferred, meaning we'll turn a blind eye to you being here, essentially. I mean, how counterintuitive is it that the case involving DACA recipients, or rather the DACA program, is before the Supreme Court of the United States? Imagine the left and the right could not come together to come up with a solution to allow children who are, for all intents and purposes, Americans, who have no idea, have never even been to Mexico. I'm just using Mexico as an example, because majority of them are from there. But for the left and for the right not to be able to come together and say, you know what, we cannot turn our backs against these children who are, for all intents and purposes, U.S. citizens, or rather residents, and they have contributed so much.
Yeah.
Our nurses, our respiratory practitioners, our accountants, our lawyers.
Yeah.
I know personally lawyers who are DACA recipients, who literally are DACA recipients representing clients in court, and yet they themselves don't know whether their status in the United States has any stability.
Yeah, it's this is not a new problem. You know, this immigration debate has been going on for years and years and years. And you said something that rings really true, that people need to stop using human beings as bargaining chips for their agendas. You know, I feel like there's no side to blame it on, you know, because both sides have been in power, had majorities and the ability to make these changes all, you know, many times, you know, Democrats and Republicans. And it hasn't, you know, they have proposed things that they know are not going to pass to rile people up and to polarize people even further. And that's victimizing real people even more. It causes hatred. It causes, racism that normally wouldn't be there just because you hear a story on the news. All of these different things where, like you said, somebody that was brought here when they were a child, you know, like a little baby, that is not a citizen. That person, unless they told you, you would never know that they weren't born here, you know, that they're not a citizen. And, you know, those people, for the most part, when they know that they could be removed from the country, those people aren't going around causing trouble. And, you know, they're working, they're going to school, you know, for the most part. And, I think that I don't think that any one person has the answer how to untangle this mess that we're in. But I think that we need to get real and actually we need to get on the backs of the politicians, and we need to make sure that they are aware of these things, and that they're actually doing things that are meaningful. And that means that they have to actually work together. You know, that you can't bring this up as an issue, as a lightning rod issue every election and then forget about it again. And that's what happens. And that's not fair to anybody. It's not fair to the voters. It's not fair to the politicians that have good intentions. And it's not fair to the people, most importantly, that are being, debated about. So I think that goes for a lot of topics in this country. I think that, not just immigration, but I think that our government has gotten to a place, because we are so polarized and people are so used to gaming the system and using our election cycles as, just a way to either hold things up, slow things down until they can get their, people in again. And then here we go again and again and again. And nothing's going to change unless the voters actually understand these things and understand what they're actually voting for during these elections, that their vote does count and it does matter, all the way from the top to your local, city council person. You know, all of these positions are there for a reason, and they have a real impact on your life. You know, people want to just think, okay, well, Trump or Biden or whoever is going to be on the ticket, that's the most important thing. But no, that actually has a very small impact on your daily life. It's your congressman, it's your representative, it's your alderman, it's your city councilman. Those are the people that actually are going to make that policy that's going to work for you. And if you vote and you get involved in the process, then we actually have an ability to make these changes, and that's what we have forgotten about. People are disenchanted.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree, and I would just tweak your point slightly
Sure.
as far as I'm concerned, and say that the person the person at the helm, the person who is leading the charge, sets the tone.
Yeah,
and
sure.
So when the tone is fraught with animosity, fraught with antagonizing words, imagery, what have you, constantly,
Absolutely.
then the people who follow you will begin to think that it's okay for their personal biases to emerge and just live, just literally just, oh, I didn't know that was okay, but now I think it's okay because
Yeah.
I'm looking at the helm and apparently it's okay.
Right.
And so that's something important to keep in mind. And there is no love lost between me personally and the current administration. That being said, I appreciate the fact that I am able to voice my opposition to and grievances with the current administration. It's something that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to do if they are living in other countries.
Yeah.
One other thing I would add to what you said is that a lot of people don't seem to know that I will be the first one to tell you that we need to shore up our borders. There's a misconception out there that immigration lawyers, pro-immigrant groups are somehow for no borders, just willy-nilly, just come on in.
Right.
Whoever you are, just come on in. No green card, no visa, nothing. Just come on in. That cannot be further from the truth. The borders have to be made less porous.
Yeah.
They are too porous. And I'm not just referring to the Canadian border or the Mexican border. I'm talking about our ports of entry. We have to protect the integrity of the United States of America. So having said that, we also have to do a much better job of dealing with the undocumented persons who live amongst us. It is not a novel idea. It is a humane idea. It is an American idea to come up with a solution and saying, hey, if you entered the country, this state to this state, or if your status is this and that, or you remain in the United States beyond your visa, or whatever the case might be,
Yeah.
you pay a fine in addition to the regular fees that you were supposed to pay in order to get a work authorization, green card, and path to citizenship. What I'm telling you, Steve, is nothing new. We
Right.
did this in 2001, known as the Life Act, where under Section 245I of the Act, it allows certain persons who had a certain form, I'm not going to get into the technicalities,
Sure.
but a certain form filed on their behalf prior to a certain date, they would be allowed to later on adjust their status through other means by paying an additional fee of $1,000. And so for the life of me, I don't understand why something that worked so well in 2001 cannot be replicated 19 years hence. Are we regressing? Are we forgetting the lessons we've learned?
Yeah.
And so
we are.
that's an important point to keep in mind. There are solutions. We just need to have the will to compromise and to remember who we are as a nation and realize that it is this togetherness that makes us the greatest nation on earth.
Yeah.
And guess what? If you and I fight, Steve, if you and I fight, who wins? Another person.
Right. Exactly.
So if there's a divide between us, guess who wins?
Yeah.
China,
Right.
Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, you name it.
Yeah. They're rooting
So
for that. They're rooting for
It's
that.
gotta stop.
Yeah, it does have to stop, and unfortunately, people are not aware of how important it is to pay attention to the policies that are being made, and to be aware of our history. I mean, history repeats itself. I mean, it's not unprecedented. These things have happened many times, and there are solutions, and I guess it always falls back to, it depends. A solution is all based on what you want to happen as well. So that's another part of it. But having those debates in public is an important thing. And I think a lot of this stuff happens in the shadows. You hear about it once on the news and then you never hear about it again. Then it moves on. The cycle is constantly moving on. You could have something as crazy as ever that would be on the news. It would be earth-shattering type of news come out. And then a couple days later, we're on to something else and we forgot about it. So that's the problem with these election cycles, is that, people are not involved. People are only focused on the shiny object in front of them right now. And unfortunately for people that are legal, voter eligible people, they are not concerned for the most part about other people's rights most of the time, a lot of times. And if they say they are, that's great. There are people that are very passionate about it, like yourself. But there aren't enough there aren't enough people that are actually, I feel, really paying attention to the actual consequences of our voting, and of the people that we vote in and the things that they do once they get there. I think we need to hold our politicians accountable to what they run on, because too many of them run on these things. They say that they're going to do this and that. They get in power and they don't do any of it, and that happens over and over and over. We've been talking about immigration reform for every cycle that I can remember, and before that. And yet we have not been able to get these solutions, which you just laid out. And I know that you don't have all of the solutions, but I know that you're on the field. You're in the field and you're actually seeing it firsthand. I think that there's plenty of smart people that are close enough to this topic that if you put them together and you actually had a debate and you figured out what the consequences will be for these people financially and, just in general, I think that we could do this pretty quickly. I don't think it's that crazy. We put a person on the moon, come on, we can't, they're there to legislate, legislate.
Absolutely.
Legislate.
Absolutely. And, history does repeat itself. Absolutely. And there's been a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment as far back as the inception of the Republic, 100 years ago. We had the Irish, we had the Italians, we had the Japanese. I mean, every generation seems to have had a group of people that it designated as the other.
Yeah.
And so 25, 30, 40 years hence, in retrospect, you're like, wait a second, that is ridiculous. You mean to tell me they were discriminating against the Irish, the Italians, the Japanese? Literally? Are you serious? But the answer is absolutely. Yeah. And so I think in a few years, maybe when I'm 60, 70, 80 years old, we will look back, or I will look back and say, remember the time when, and we shouldn't have to wait for a generation to come to pass. Yeah. For us to realize that, hey, we could have done things better because because we learned our lessons from prior experiences. And so that is, I think, the most disheartening part of all of this, that there is so much opportunity to be better versions of ourselves, and yet we refuse to take that step in good faith and say, I'm going to compromise and move this nation forward because America deserves it, because America is the greatest country on earth, because it deserves. Basically, what I'm saying is, Steve, you and I have a fiduciary duty to make America the best version of itself. Yeah. And so this notion of, again, I don't want to get too political, but this notion of make America great again. Okay, we can get into that, but how can you make it great again when the idea is to always strive to be better?
Yeah, right.
In other words, you weren't great back then, but you're better today, and let's work to make it even better. Right. And so that has been lost in the discourse. Mm-hmm. And as you pointed out very, very eloquently, you said people are advancing their agendas by using vulnerable groups as bargaining chips. Yeah. And that is not who we are. That is not what America is about. We are better than that.
Yeah.
We've proven it time and time again, and we can do it again.
I think we can. I think we have to. I don't think we have a choice. If we don't, there won't be an America. If we keep our division and we keep our spite and we point the fingers and call our neighbors our enemies, then we're going to fail. And we're just going to be another example of what not to do in history. And I think that we have so much going for us and so much potential still. We're still a young country, in the grand scheme of things. And it's an experiment, and it's always changing. And thankfully, we still have the right to vote, and we still have free speech. And we can get into censorship and all the different things going on with social media maybe another time. But we have to pay attention to all of these things because they're all important. And I agree with you 100%. It's not, again, making it great again. It's always getting better. Make it better. Be better. I can't believe we've done more than an hour. It's a great conversation. We're both really passionate about this stuff, and hopefully for people that are listening, this makes you think about something. It's very important to listen to the other perspective. Don't just listen to opinions that you agree with constantly. There's plenty of people that don't agree with immigration, this or that, or whatever. You can fall on any side, but it's the ability to listen to an argument of the other opposing side, taking that information to rethink your position, and then do that again and do that again and do that again. And if we can all do that repeatedly, then we'll all come out in a better place. So, I really do appreciate you coming on, Alen. It's a real pleasure talking with you. Hopefully we can get these things sorted out. I think we could definitely do another show about many other topics, so we'll have to set something up. But is there anything that you would like to leave the audience to think about, or is there anything that you'd like to say about how maybe people can help the cause or get involved in some way?
First and foremost, Steve, thank you so much for having me on. I honestly can't believe that the hour is past, but it literally feels like we've been talking for about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It just speaks to the fact that both you and I are coming at this topic from a good place, meaning our hearts.
Yeah.
We don't have hidden agendas. We just want to respect the fiduciary duty that we have to America in order to have done our part in advancing the discourse. And so thank you so much for the platform. Thank you so much for what you do. You talk about different topics, and that's wonderful. And I really hope that your listeners have had an opportunity to, for a brief moment in time anyway, to see things from a different perspective. And I don't really have anything profound to leave your listeners and viewers with, other than to say that just remember, facts matter.
Yeah.
America is the greatest country on earth. We owe a fiduciary duty to it, and better days lie ahead as long as we stay true to the commitment that we have expressed to making it a better version of itself. And so these are pretty basic concepts. I feel silly even repeating them, but it seems like when there is chaos, you go back to fundamentals.
Yeah.
And so as long as we start with the fundamentals, then we can rebuild that which we have broken along the way and build and make America what it deserves to be, which is, again, a better version of itself.
Perfect way to end it. Like I said, if anybody's interested in speaking with Alen about any topics related to immigration, if you need any advice or you'd like representation, I will put the link in the description below. And again, that's Alen Takhsh, immigration attorney out of Evanston, Illinois. Really pleasure to have you on, and we'll be talking again soon.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate you.